So let me tell you what's going to happen. What's going to happen is first we're going to get sort of a general introduction from Pineleaf to make sure everybody knows where we need to be and make sure everybody's on train to actually successfully enter the skirmish here this evening. Then if you guys need to go and get to the skirmish camp and beef up your soldier or something, you'll have time to do that. And while you do that, I'm going to give a little lore talk related to the skirmish we're doing tonight. And then after my lore talk, well, during which hopefully you will have had time to do whatever transactions you need to do with your skirmish soldier, then Pineleaf is going to give us a more specific tactical briefing on the skirmish we're going to do this evening. So, without further ado,
I can hear you.
Let me introduce our special guest here this evening. We are fortunate to have the Sultan of Skirmish here with us tonight. Pineleaf Needles, one of the co-hosts of the LOTRO Players podcast, and he's going to help us. I am, as I've said before, a complete noob when it comes to skirmishes, so I am very much going to be relying on the help of others to make sure that I can get through and survive. And Pineleaf is here to I know that to many people who are here tonight, many of you are not very familiar with skirmishes, so this will be a good chance for us all to kind of learn together. So you're among friends. So Pineleaf, I'll turn it over to you here to give some general pointers and things about where we should be to start.
All right then, let us begin. First question then is, what is a skirmish? A skirmish is a type of instance, usually short to medium length, say anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes if done solo, but the group ones can take longer. Raids, I think, are known to take around 45 minutes, and which are scalable on 3 different levels. And by scalable on 3 levels, I mean that you could scale them by level. Some skirmishes can go down as low as level 20, such as the one we're doing tonight, and all skirmishes can go all the way up to level cap. Each skirmish has an unlock level where you can unlock it. So there are 3 at level 20, then at each 5 level interval there's another one. Second way they're scalable is they're scalable by group size. You could run skirmishes solo, you could run them in pairs, you could run them in small fellowships, you could run them in full fellowships of 6, and you could run them in 12-player raids. The other distinguishing factor of skirmishes is that you will have a skirmish soldier that will be with you. And this skirmish soldier is of a particular type. You can have an herbalist, which is good at helping to heal. You can have an archer that's good at ranged attacks. You can have a warrior who's great at grabbing mobs and getting you killed. You can have... Yeah, I know. I don't like warriors all that much.
A little biased there. I hear creeping through here.
Yeah. Actually, what warriors are they're good at champion-style attacks. Yeah, some people do like their warriors, and if you treat them well, then they can actually do a lot of damage to their opponents, and they're good at multi-target melee attacks. You can have a protector who helps to gather the enemy, and they can tank for you. You can have a sage who does... Generally, they do area attacks. They are your tactical attackers. And you got to be careful with sages. They're light armor, tactical damage. They gather lots of people. They think they're tanks, and if you're not careful, they get themselves killed. So I only use a sage with my guardian, since the guardian is actually able to counteract that. And which one did I... Oh, yes, and the banner guard, who has special buffs, similar to that you have of a captain. Now, in order to do a skirmish, you need to unlock skirmishes. First of all, you must be at least level 20, since we're doing a level 20 minimum skirmish. And second of all, you must have gone through the skirmish tutorial. Now you may wonder, what's the skirmish tutorial? This is a quest you get at any of the skirmish camps. And you will find skirmish camps all over Middle-earth. Probably the most likely ones for us will be, for example, Tenadir, which you can get to from the Mickle-Delving Mount if you are high enough level. There's one at Southbury, which is probably the first one most people see. There's one at Brocking Borings, but it is the most out-of-the-way location ever, so I never really go to that one. And there's one at Thorns Hall, just outside the entrance to Thorns Hall. When you go up the stairs, instead of going through the doors, you turn right and you see the skirmish camp over there. And there are a bunch of barterers there, and one of them is a skirmish captain, and the skirmish captain will get you through the tutorial. And I think it's about time that anyone here who has not gone through the tutorial yet probably should head over to the tutorial area. If you have gone through the tutorial area, but your soldier is dreadfully under-ranked, you might also want to go to the skirmish camp and go to the skirmish trainer there so that you can get your soldier ranked up to an appropriate rank. And I think that we have a hunter here who volunteered to take some people.
Yeah, I can take people if here I am here. If anybody wants to come be with me, I can follow up and take people if they need to go.
Right. Very well then. And while people do that, we can have Corey go into the proper area.
Okay.
Into the lore behind us.
That's right. We're going to be doing the Siege of Gondamon tonight. And I find Gondamon a particularly interesting place in the LOTRO world. I would like to, before I begin my lore talk tonight, I would like to apologize to Andang and Pineleaf, because what I'm going to do in this lore talk is like completely reverse what I said during their podcast on Saturday. So I just want to be upfront about that. Because I think what's really cool about Gondamon is the way the game depicts the relationship between elves and dwarves. It's really awesome. For those of you who don't know what I'm referring to, Trish and I were guests on the LOTRO Players podcast this weekend, and the subject of our debate was this question: where, who do you think did a better job of depicting, a more interesting relationship between elves and dwarves? And I was arguing for the book against Andang and Pineleaf, who are arguing for the game. So having just made counter-arguments against that, I'm now going to talk about what a cool job I think they did, especially in Arid Luin.
Notice how he didn't include you there, Trish. He argued against us.
I know. It's fair.
Trying to slight.
I think I got my lore wrong. Actually, I think part of my argument was inaccurate lore, so it's only fair that he should leave.
No. I wasn't trying to slide. Notice I didn't mention Braxwolf either, but that was kind of, it was noble what Braxwolf. I felt like Braxwolf was kind of taking one for the team there. That was very noble. But anyway, okay. So Arid Luin. The Arid Luin region is a really fascinating one from a book perspective, mostly because we know almost nothing about it. That's the primary thing that's most fascinating, I think, about Arid Luin. It has a really interesting history because, of course, we know that there are remnants of elves there, not just the fact that the Grey Havens are over in that direction. We know that Círdan the Shipwright lives over there. We know that over there was the kingdom where Gilgalad was ruling from before the Battle of the Last Alliance. So we know that there's a lot of elf history there, and in the Second and Third Age of Middle Earth, that area, after the War of Wrath, on the far western shores of Middle Earth, was really the biggest center of where the elves were remaining in Middle Earth. So, especially the last of the exiles and sort of the remnants of the elves of Beleriand. So So, that's one really cool thing that we kind of generally know about that region, and yet we don't actually know what it looks like. We never really interact with them. Nobody, apart from the trip, which is not really described in any detail, of the trip to the Grey Havens at the end of the Return of the King, nobody ever goes over there. The story, the narrative itself never goes over there, to the west of the Shire, though it's referred to a bunch of times. And then at the same time, we also know that it is we've got Thorin's Hall over there, the place where Thorin and company, where the outcasts of Erebor were living. And what's more, we know that the Blue Mountains over there have a history. Of course, people who remember the Silmarillion will recall that the great dwarf halls of Nogrod and Belegost were in the Blue Mountains. Further north, they're in the now submarine portions of the Blue Mountains. Nogrod and Belegost themselves didn't survive. But again, the Blue Mountains have been the home of dwarves for time out of mind. So we've got this ancient ancestral place of the dwarves, which we know was of major importance leading up to the Hobbit, in the time between the fall of Erebor and the reclamation of Erebor. We know we have this really important elf area, and yet again, we never go over there. We never really see it. And when you look at it on the map, as it is on the map in game, it's pretty small. There's not much space. It's not like there's all of this dwarf kingdom and there's all of this elf kingdom. There's not all that much room. So we've got the dwarf areas and the elf areas all kind of together. So one has to imagine, as it seems indeed the LOTRO designers have imagined, that the elves and dwarves are going to have to really
Interact?
Interact. They're going to have to find some way to work together. That is something that I think that they do a really interesting job of in the game. So where we're going to be going, where we're going to be skirmishing tonight in Gondamon, is the place where in game it's really sort of the frontier between the elf lands and the dwarf lands, and that's that. I mean, I find the Ered Luin plot, the sort of the prologue plots, especially the Elvish prologue plot. The Dwarvish one, I think, is I don't find it nearly as interesting as I find the Elvish plot. Mm-hmm. It kind of does. Anyone else get the impression that when they wrote the Ered Luin prologue for the epic quest line, they really wrote it for the elf side, and then they just kind of shoehorned the dwarves into it from the other end? That's kind of what it sounds like.
It does seem that way, yeah.
Because I mean, the whole thing with like the missing elf son, who then people start calling a prince for some reason, though it's not really clear what claim he has to that title exactly. But whatever. Anyway, it's fine. So like the whole missing elf prince thing, and like you're talking to his dad, all that's really it grows really organically from the elf side, and then the dwarf side, it's just like you're chasing after missing cogwheels and stuff until all of a sudden you're at Gondamon and having to discover halfway through what has been going on. But anyway, again, Gondamon is sort of the frontier there, and it's the one place in Ered Luin, I think this is true, the one place in Ered Luin where you really see populations of both. It's primarily dwarves there, but we do see a significant, population of elves there in Gondamon as well. So I think that it's thinking of the sort of the rich history of the relationship between elves and dwarves that we get in the Silmarillion and in the Hobbit, and all of the sort of backstory of that's very often evoked but very rarely described in any detail. Tolkien has really kind of left a lot open there to kind of fill in the gaps and come to try to understand. And I think that's one of the things that I like. I said in the LOTRO Players podcast, and still think that they slightly oversimplified or slightly overdid the elvish ignorance. It's a little hard for me to buy that the elves really don't know anything about the different houses of the dwarves. Possible, I suppose, but I have a harder time buying that. But nevertheless,
fall asleep during the names.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those elves just don't pay attention to that kind of thing, apparently.
Well, I mean, you got the lore masters like Elrond who know almost everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody knows everything.
Right? No, it's true. Not everybody knows everything, but and I mean, like basically, you could squeeze it in if you're willing to say that the elves have just been like aggressively not paying attention to the dwarves. You know, that like to them one dwarf looks much like another, and they have like actively refused to learn anything more about the dwarves. That to me is really the only excuse for the dwarves not knowing the difference between, you know, or it's because it's not even not knowing the difference. It's not just like that they can't tell, or that, you know, that they mistake a Longbeard for a Dourhand. It's that they don't even seem to recognize that there is a difference, or that there is any kind of division among the dwarves. And again, that sort of seems to me like not only mere chance ignorance, but like really aggressive ignorance on the part of the elves. And you know, I can kind of almost believe it, but I find it. They're
very self-centered. The elves.
It takes them, yeah, but
they just don't care because they're just focused on elves.
I mean, see, like that's pretty much what you'd have to do. Is you'd have to, but I didn't get the impression. When I went through the Arid Luin story, I went through first as an elf. I went through it as a dwarf too, but I went through it first as an elf. And that wasn't, the reason I had a hard time with it is that that's not the impression I got from some of the elves. I mean, there are a few of the elf characters you meet in Arid Luin of whom I could believe that, you know, they just firmly had the opinion that one dwarf is pretty much like another. But I had a hard time believing that of all of the elves in Arid Luin, many of whom really seemed much more involved with what was going on, you know, in the world there. And it's a little hard to think that they wouldn't at least have heard of the fact that there are these different houses of the dwarves and that maybe they don't always get along. You think they'd even just know enough history to know that. But anyway, my point is not to nitpick. My point rather, though, is that once I get over that hurdle, I like the fact I like Gondamon as this place where the two of those cultures are really meeting and sometimes clashing and needing to come to understand one another. And I like the fact that the epic prologue quest is really primarily focused on basically kind of bridging that gap and helping to establish. I don't know if it's officially called an alliance, but essentially an alliance, or a working relationship at least, between the Longbeards and the elves of Arid Luin. And I thought that was a really neat, you know, coming into that from, especially from the elf perspective, I found that a really neat kind of transition into the game. I thought that was really well thought through. So anyway, there's any thoughts or questions that others have?
Crickets. We have crickets.
Yeah, and I know.
I think everybody's nervous about doing skirmishes.
Again, I have a question.
Sure, yeah.
So it seems like most of the conflict is Longbeards versus Dourhands, but whatever happened to the Firebeards and Broadbeams? I know that they weren't as common, but it seems like they aren't mentioned at all, unless I haven't run through the Dwarf prologue recently enough.
No, they're definitely not mentioned in the Dwarf prologue. I don't know if they might come into other later parts of the game. As always, I must, protest that I am utterly ignorant of anything past Volume 1. So, people who, those wise and experienced in the ways of Volumes 2 and 3 of the game might want to weigh in there. But no, they're definitely not referred to in the prologue section.
The question is, on those, are they mentioned in the Lord of the Rings itself, or are they in supplemental materials?
Right. That's what I was wondering.
Because supplemental materials are off limits.
I'm trying to remember.
Well, they're definitely mentioned in the character creation. I mean, you can. Well, it's. I believe in it when you select as the Blue Mountains. It's mentioned that the Firebeards and Broadbeams are from there. Although I could just be adding information I know outside.
Well,
I don't remember from the character creation window. I remember that it said what area you came from. I can't remember what the supporting information there says.
Yeah, the only other divisions between the dwarves that you come across are are in Moria, and in that case, it's just two different reputation factions that you can grind with, either the Iron Garrison or I forget the other one.
No, the Iron Garrison Miners and the Iron Garrison Scouts, I believe.
Guards.
Guard. Was it guard?
Guards.
Guards, I think.
Guard.
Oh, guards. You're right, guards.
And but they don't mention any. I don't know if you want to call them sub races or anything like that. It's just basically everybody is there to do a job, and that's that. But I don't remember anything racial coming into it.
Oh, yeah, I don't
I
think
think it's
they
more
make.
clan than racial.
Moria is
Exactly.
a Longbeard tradition. The other the other 6 clans do not care about Moria at all. That's made clear in the back of the Lord of the Rings.
Yes, yes. Yes, that's right. Moria is the traditional ancestral home of the Longbeards. And that was true even in the First Age. Like, that's where they were, while the stuff in Beleriand was happening and, the dwarves of Nogrod and Belagost were getting involved, Durin and his heirs and the Longbeards were already in Moria. But yeah, the licensing thing, I can't remember offhand. I mean, I'd have to look at it again. Do they mention the names of other houses there in Appendix A? At the end
That's
of
what
the
I was trying to
of
remember.
Appendix A of the Return, because if they are, then they would have the rights to those, and I think they could get away with using them. I mean, one of the things I know that LOTRO is really careful about, even if something is mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, but it's a thing that's mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, but primarily lives somewhere else. A classic example would be Turambar, of course. Turin is mentioned a couple times in the Lord of the Rings, but of course the Turin story is really found in the Silmarillion, and so it's kind of, for rights purposes, kind of considered a Silmarillion property, even though it does occur in the Lord of the Rings. So they tend to be pretty careful about that. But I would think, I mean, it's not like there's the only other supplementary texts that really talk about the dwarves in that way, other than like History of Middle-earth stuff, earlier versions of the Silmarillion material, is the quest of Erebor in Unfinished Tales. And I'm trying to think where that would be. I think they might have. Did they make them up? I think they might have made. I can't remember the names of the other dwarf houses, and I might just be blanking on it.
Happening to have Appendix A right here in front of me, and
We knew somebody would.
Yeah.
I started rereading of Durin's Folk not too long ago, and it basically just concerns itself with that. It doesn't say anything about any other
With
clan.
the Longbeards, yeah. Yeah. And the Longbeards are mentioned from early on. I mean, the Longbeards are first described, are first mentioned back in, they're at least in the Lay of Lathian, if not in the Book of Lost Tales. So they're an old idea. I remember Luthien including references to the beards of the Longbeards as in the spell that she weaves to make her hair grow long. Okay, there we go. Eredrush has said they're only given their clan names in Peoples of Middle-earth. Okay, yeah, so that's a late work.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I was not remembering it, because I am not fresh on the Peoples of Middle-earth. I haven't read that in a little while. So yeah, that's good. So yes, that is supplemental material then, which LOTRO wouldn't have primary rights to. So that's why they're not going to include those in the game. Yeah, and it makes sense. That's exactly the kind of thing that Tolkien was doing late in his life. Exactly the kind of detail that he would have that he liked to be filling out, that he really didn't have filled out earlier on.
All right, thanks.
Ugh, what's that?
I don't know.
It sounds like a player coming through their microphone into the Mythgard audio.
Oh.
Yeah, Cooley Finn. That's not a
My microphone is turned off, and I'm playing that thing.
Yeah, it's somebody else that's near you, I think.
Somebody else's. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's gone now, so it seems to be fine.
Okay.
Cool. Any other sort of general, like, Arid Lewin-related lore questions that people have from stuff in game? One thing I wanted to say, just sort of in general, I know that some of you here are people who have been attending Mythgard classes in one form or another for a while, and so are comparatively used to the sort of classroom interface here. But I know that many of you have not participated in any Mythgard classes, and therefore are probably in the mode of just listening. You may well, however, be used to just listening to me talk, on your iPod or something. So I know I've heard from a couple people who have said that it's kind of hard to get used to at first when you're sitting and listening to me talk in what feels like a comfortable and normal mode to you, and then all of a sudden I just stop and say, do you have any questions? And you're not used to actually talking back to your iPod. But I do want to encourage you guys to get in the habit of making comments and asking questions. Whenever I do, any of the live classes that I do at Mythgard, I always like to interact. Of course, we have our mics all live, which I don't normally do in our classroom settings, because I'm okay with a slightly increased amount of chaos during Mythgard Mondays. If we're in game anyway, there's always going to be chaos anyhow. I prefer a slightly more orderly classroom than normal, as of course normally in my classroom people aren't bringing pets and setting off fireworks. But so, like I said, higher threshold for chaos in the Mythgard Monday session. But anyway, I'm definitely I definitely always like to encourage questions and comments and thoughts that you guys have. I don't want you to think that lore talks need always simply be a monologue. So I'm happy to.
That Hobbit's talking to you right there.
Well, I was just going to say we could comment on the Wagglejaws at Town Hall, who are a continual fixture of Mythgard Mondays and have always been.
I actually did think of a question. On the Arid Lewin map, it says to Northern Arid Lewin, and obviously they haven't made that yet. But in the lore, is there anything? I mean, Arid Lewin's kind of made up, but that area kind of exists. But would there be anything to the north of Arid Lewin?
Well, the main thing that's kind of missing is really like Linden. The land of Linden, where I mean, like you'll notice in game, we never see, for instance, like the palace where Gilgalad once ruled, right? That would be really cool, and that's kind of what I'm guessing. Because of course, the most noteworthy thing that we don't have, and this gets to did I just say, Solid Hits Face Ripper is really a name that just cuts right to the quick. That's a
champion name. That's what that is.
That's a game. That's a name that's just not messing around.
But it says on the tin.
Exactly. That is a character who is as advertised. Though my own perverse sense of humor, I would probably be tempted to name my lore master that or something. But anyway. But before I started. Commenting on Solid Hit's name. He was asking if there are areas to the west of Thorns Hall that are not currently on the LOTRO map, and do I think they may be fleshed out in the future. So, ending very similar to what you were asking about there. And so I would love to see Linden. I would love to, we get to see where Elendil, we get to walk where Elendil walked. It would be really cool to walk where Gilgalad walked. Because both Gilgalad as a character and his his land, his kingdom, is definitely something that I find really kind of enticing in the lore. I've always been fascinated by Gil-galad's character, and of course we know so little about him. But yeah, it's. But of course, the other big thing that's not on the LOTRO map is the Tower Hills, and the Grey Havens, when I was visiting the Turbine Studios a couple months back, and we did that broadcast with Chris Pearson and Mike Trout and me. I don't know if any of you saw that. One of the people, one of the sort of the write-ins asked, is there a place in Middle Earth that hasn't been done yet in LOTRO that you would like to see? Chris Pearson's answer to that question was the Grey Havens. So I am not without hope that they might eventually get to it, and that would be really cool. I would like to see some more out there in Ered Luin. I found the story, I found the plot of the elves in Ered Luin to be more satisfying than the dwarves, but I find the region of the dwarves sort of to be much more visually and kind of geographically satisfying than the region of the elves. Kellendam is nice, it's a nice little town, but it's not much, and this like little town on the Brandywine is not doing it for me. I want Linden.
It's constantly peppered by the sound of breaking ankles as level 3s try to figure out their steering. Oh, Corey, maybe you can answer that one. How come elves don't like handrails?
Yeah, it's I have to admit that I fell a fair number of times when actually the really fun experience when you're really low level and a complete noob in doing Ered Luin is having that experience of falling off a path and plummeting down and breaking your ankle and then saying, "Oh, that's how I get here. Okay, I'll have to remember to jump off that cliff again next time."
Moria's great for that.
Yeah.
Well, you know how you learn to not fall off a bed? I imagine it's the same for elves, just off of their own houses.
Tell you, that building would have never got past OSHA.
Eventually, they just take off the guardrails, and they're fine.
Training legs.
Right,
well, Corey, if you're hungry for Elven lands, I'll be very interested to know what you think of Lothlorien once you get there.
Yes, I am excited to see it. I think I have. It's funny because I know. I keep talking about the LOTRO lore and the way that they've done things, and I know that I am, in a sense, doing a disservice to it. And this is brought home to me every time I talk with the Turbine people, especially because there's Chris Pearson and a couple others who have been with Turbine ever since the beginning of LOTRO, but most of the people currently working for Turbine, have only been working for them for 5 years or less. So I remember when I was there and I was talking with the team, the guys who write the quest chains, not the epic quest line, but the regional quest chains, and I was still brand new. I think Wiggend was level 30 something, and he was my first character, and I didn't have any alts at that time, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I really like this Bree quest line," and these guys were just looking at me with these blank faces, we have no idea what you're talking about right now. That was written by the guy before our predecessor, and they were, they had written stuff in Rohan, but they didn't know any. They knew very little about it. I mean, they'd played it, but they didn't know anything about it. On the inside. So. Anyhow, so I know that all of the stuff that LOTRO has done lately, all the stuff where they've been as they've been kind of perfecting their craft and getting better and doing more stuff. I believe that it is all really awesome and even better than the stuff that I've already seen. So here I am judging it by the stuff which I know the people who've been there for a while are like, oh, gosh, there's really stuff we would change about those early regions, and that's all I know, still to this point, but it'll be good. I'm looking forward to learning more in good time.
If I may,
Yeah.
I also recall that Chris said that the reason we won't be seeing the Grey Havens for a while and Círdan and all those guys is that most of the players of LOTRO started to get upset if he did regions that went away from the Fellowship's path.
Right.
Like
Right.
when they did the Dunland update, a lot of people, there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth because we weren't following either Aragorn's troop or Frodo's troop somewhere.
Right. Yes. Yes. And I think once
I know it's not. I know it's Balderdash, but it wasn't me.
Somebody says Balderdash.
Oh, well.
Tommy Rot.
We were heading towards Aragorn.
Yeah. 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 You know, exactly. I mean, I do think,
People
especially
really want to
as
get to Gondor.
right. Well, exactly, and especially as the part of the story that they're following is the time when everything accelerates enormously. Chris Pearson has talked about this a lot. You know that you know things are so luxurious. You know the Fellowship is hanging out in Rivendell forever. You know, like for months at a time. So there's lots and lots of time. Like, oh yeah, why don't you go to Evendim and spend a long time questing for the jewel that Aragorn needs to remake Andúril? No problems. Take your time, and then you get to Gondor. And the whole Gondor plot of The Lord of the Rings happens in like 3 days. So trying to fit the timelines in gets really, really... And so that's another thing that's kind of led to the pressure of them wanting to go on and not getting a chance to do some of the side things, even some of the local side things. Like, I was surprised that they didn't have the Woses. I was kind of expecting that they would have done Khan, but I still hope that they will. One thing that Chris Pearson was really clear on was that he certainly has no plans to stop when they get to Mordor. You know that they're planning to flesh out a bunch of other things. So awesome. I hope that they will you know sort of follow the momentum of the plot and then kind of spread out.